All right, welcome to Senior Living 101, where we get expert takes on the environments where seniors live, work, play, heal, and thrive. So just a little note, this is sponsored by SAGE, the Society for the Advancement of Gerontological Environments. And fun fact, everybody here is a SAGE member. So if you want in on all this brilliant mind stuff, go ahead and check out our website at sagefederation.org and consider becoming a member. Anyway, I'm Trey King. I'll be your host, and today I'm joined by our esteemed guests, Maggie Calkins and Philippe Saad. Maggie and Philippe, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Uh, Maggie Calkins. I have been working in environments for older adults and particularly people experiencing cognitive change since about 1985, so 40 some years. Have had a consulting business and currently head up a small independent research institute called Ideas Institute in Cleveland, Ohio.
And my name is Philippe Saad. I'm a principal architect at Demella Schaefer, and I've been in the business of designing spaces for older adults for close to 15 years. My advocacy is around trying to look at our environments and making the environment as inclusive and supportive as we can for people as they age.
Yeah, awesome. So, like on that note, I think a great way to start is we're talking about dementia and Alzheimer's care today, obviously, and why don't we start by just kind of laying out, hey, what is dementia and Alzheimer's? How do they differ? And how does the reality of Alzheimer's and dementia differ from maybe our society's perception of it?
All right, I'll start with that. Um, the best analogy that I ever heard is that dementia is like it's an umbrella term and it's like a headache. There are lots of things that can cause a headache. Alzheimer's disease is one form of dementia, so it's like a migraine. But
Yeah.
you can also have a headache from a sinus infection or somebody hitting you upside the head with a two by four, or, all sorts of other kinds of things can cause a headache. So lots of things can cause dementia. Alzheimer's disease is one, probably the most common. There's also multi-infarct, which is a series of small strokes that people experience. There's Lewy body dementia, there's frontotemporal dementia, there's Parkinsonian dementia. There are also a lot of dementias, because dementia is a set of symptoms that are caused by things that are completely treatable. So, a thyroid imbalance or a medication imbalance can cause the symptoms of dementia, but are completely treatable.
Mm.
So, what are those symptoms? The most common ones with, particularly with Alzheimer's disease, is change in and loss of memory. So your sense of who you are is deeply embedded in your memories. And, how you interact with people is related to your memory of how you have interacted with them before. So that when you no longer have those memories to be able to call on, things change. There's also change in executive function. You have a harder time figuring out how things work. And we'll give you some examples later on. And, simple daily tasks like preparing a meal become overwhelming because there are actually a lot of steps and a lot of decisions that have to be made and be made in a certain order. And so when that executive function begins to fail, your ability to maintain your normal routines changes as well. There can be changes in judgment. So, doing things that aren't particularly safe, like if you've got a gas stove and the pilot has gone out and you need to light it, going down to the basement to the furnace to light a stack of newspapers to bring it up to light your stove shows bad judgment. And these are all real examples that I have come across in my
Mm.
time in this field. And then there can be personality changes where someone who used to be sweet and kind and generous becomes less so, and they may become more judgmental. They may um, disagree with people. They may show racist tendencies, sexist
Mm.
tendencies, things like that. And that is really hard for families to deal with. So there's a range of different kinds of things that happen, and they happen in different order with different forms of dementia. So with frontotemporal, balance and gait issues are more apparent early on. And we'll leave it at that. This isn't a medical class, so we won't go into that. Philippe, do you want to talk a little about sort of the stigma and
Yeah.
the experiences?
Yeah, I'll add to that is that what I came to also know and learn over the past 15 years of my work is being in touch with people who have that lived in experience with dementia. And people tell you the stigma is one thing, and it's a horrible thing in our society. Getting old already suffers from the stigma, but having dementia adds on to that. What people tell you is that we're not raised or educated to know how to manage that disease. There's more and more awareness right now. There's organizations that really provide a lot of advocacy, but people tell you it's not a death sentence. Us who see it from the outside, we tend to think that that's it. There's nothing we can do.
Mhm.
And actually today, Maggie and I want to tell that the stories that there is a lot we can do, not necessarily from the medical side, but from the environmental side. We are architects, designers, and the purpose of today's call is really to show and to talk about some of the elements that when they're embedded carefully in the environment, their intention is to help people live with the disease so that that disease does not become that debilitating death sentence as people think of it, but the environment becomes more supportive to those individuals. And my advocacy is for people for the environment to serve people at different levels of the disease. And that's why if the environment, any environment that we experience, whether it is a bus stop, a park, or a supermarket, or a senior living community, has the right components to support people as they age, including when they age with some sort of dementia, then this environment is like a prosthetic. It supports them to live their daily lives.
Right.
So awesome points, both of you all. Thanks so much. From there, why don't we talk about some of those like design features that we can implement to effectuate the change that you're talking about?
Philippe, when we were preparing, you had some great examples related to lighting. Why don't we start with that?
Yes. Actually, I would like to start with familiarity. Can
Okay.
we cut and paste, right? Yeah, yeah. Because familiar, yeah. Um, Trey, maybe the first thing we can talk about, which is important for people as they lose their cognitive ability to understand the environment. And our environment is full of a lot of elements that stimulate us. There's a lot of new innovations that happen also in our environment, which is a
Yeah.
very good thing. But at the same time, new things that are unfamiliar to the person who is now experiencing dementia becomes very unsettling. So the first, the biggest umbrella thing, if we want to talk about, or principle, is familiarity. And I want to pause a little bit and explain familiarity is probably different for you than for me. And it's very cultural and contextual. And it's also related to time. So if you grew up in the 50s and the 60s, you grew up with a mid-century aesthetic, then a chair that looks a certain way in a mid-century design is a familiar object to you. So as designers start to think about environments that are supportive for older adults, familiarity has to be put in the context, in the geography, and in time. And a chair needs to look like a chair, a bed needs to look like a bed. And we want to avoid confusing people with not that creativity is not valued, but creativity for the sake of creativity sometimes confuses people. So we want to be mindful of that familiarity of the objects.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's
And
that's oh, go ahead, Maggie. Yeah.
I was going to say, and familiarity works at different levels. So Philippe was talking about the design of, objects and furniture and things, but there's also familiarity of scale. And in the places where people tend to live, the scale is, for lack of a better word, what we call residential. You experience a relatively small number of people living together.
Yeah.
And the way we used to design nursing homes and institutional environments was to sort of put as many people together as we could manage with the staffing. And so the early regulations said that at night, one nurse could oversee 60 people. So every living area where people lived, what we used to call units, had 60 people, because why
Yeah.
would you want to have fewer than that? Because then you're wasting staff efficiency time. And what we have come to recognize is that that's not familiar, and it makes it much harder for individuals experiencing cognitive changes to understand where they are, to relate to it. It's why they spend so much time saying, I want to go home. This
Yeah.
is not home. Whereas if you design something that looks and feels like home, or where someone can feel at home,
Yeah.
comfortable, then you've gotten rid of a whole layer of anxiety that that person is experiencing, and they're experiencing it all the time, every day.
Yeah.
It's just pervasive. And so that's one of the big lessons that we've learned since I started in the field 40 years ago, was that scale of the number of people and the size of the spaces, and that the spaces look like spaces that people can recognize, helps
Yeah.
them to function.
Yeah, wow. It really like one conversation that I have a lot with folks in the design for aging space, especially in the skilled nursing and memory care world, is like, we're designing a home-like environment, but that's not far enough. We need to be designing like home-like implies that it's other, right? It implies that it's not a home still. So we
Yes.
we should be building homes. Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I
Yeah.
just yeah,
I've moved
I got
away from
chills. No,
home
I
life.
love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. Same.
Yeah.
Trey, if I may add,
Of
so we
course.
talked about familiarity.
Yeah.
For people to see a familiar object, now light and lighting comes as a maybe second and very important principles for dementia inclusive design. And light is a very big terminology. We can simply say that your environment has to be appropriately lit for the functions that people intend to do in those spaces. I'll give you an anecdote and a story. How many of us have been to restaurants and we cannot even see the menu, right? This is an element because
Mhm.
exactly, because lighting could be dim, font could be small, or the contrast on paper between the letters and the background of the paper is not very clear.
Yeah.
As a 50-year-old man, I go to a restaurant and I get very frustrated when I cannot see the menu. And imagine an older
Yeah.
person with advanced dementia trying to read their environment, no pun intended, but reading the environment. And reading the environment is understanding the object in its context. So we use lighting, we use contrast and color as elements to help people better read the environment. Contrast can be a good thing because it will highlight the object against its background. So a handrail against a wall wants to have a contrasting color with the wall.
Yeah.
Um, Contrast on the floor, for example, can be very disturbing for somebody who's trying to walk on the surface. So a harsh contrast between one floor to another carpet to LVT or porcelain tile can signify very different thing to people. It could signify a step because the color is darker, so it can confuse people, or it could make people stop in their way because they do not understand this. What is this next surface they're going to be stepping on? So in general, we can't say contrast is good or bad. It depends how it's applied. And if it's applied in a way to make the environment more readable, then it helps people navigate their environment. If it prevents people from navigating the space, then we want to avoid contrast in some spaces.
So the
Yeah.
example that I like to use that's a very sort of practical, functional example with contrast is bathrooms. When we think about how many bathrooms are designed with white walls and white floors and white fixtures or beige, that isn't enough contrast for people to be able to see where the toilet is. And so someone might look in the bathroom and not recognize what the room is because they can't see what's important in the room. So the location of the toilet so that it's highly visible and that there is contrast between the toilet and the floor and the wall so that it stands out. This was research I did back in the 1980s where we designed one of the early memory care assisted living buildings, and the walls and the floor were sort of dark red, and the toilet, this throne, was white, and you couldn't miss it.
Yeah.
We also designed it so that we didn't, they were all private rooms and we didn't have full walls and doors. We had a privacy curtain and we designed it so that the curtain could stay open. Or when we did research, we had for half of the time the curtain closed. So you had to, the toilet was still there. You had to know that it was behind the toilet. And we watched people coming out of their bedrooms when their curtain was closed, walking down the hallway, looking indoors and sort of turning their head because they knew where to look where the toilet ought to be. But if they couldn't see it, they couldn't figure out how to get to it. And so when they got to a bedroom where the curtain was open, they would go in and use the toilet. So they knew what they wanted, they knew what they were looking for, but the environment wasn't helping them. And so when you design resident bedrooms, apartments, you want to make sure that the toilet is highly visible from the bed. You know, falls happen at
Yeah.
night when people are going to the bathroom. And if they can't see where the door to the bathroom is because it's around the corner and in the entryway to the bedroom, and they can't see the toilet, then you're more likely to have falls and you're more likely to have a lot of incontinence. And that's not something that anybody wants to be experiencing. So
Yeah.
taking these principles and thinking about them in a really thoughtful way about how do I apply where I want high contrast on the things that are important to see. Philippe talked about the handrails. I talk about toilets. And then where do you not want contrast on the things that aren't important? And so really busy fabric patterns or
Mhm.
particularly the flooring because it's a functional surface are where you don't want the contrast.
Yeah, I've seen that play out in real time when I was walking an existing like memory care community, and people like if there's a really like it's admittedly very handsome carpet pattern on the ground in like a what should have been a common space that got a lot of use, people would just walk right up to it and like walk around it as if the solid path around that sort of common space was like a cliff. Yeah,
Let's
Yep.
pause a little bit and talk about the word handsome that you used. And this is something that we face, us who design inclusive environments. The,
yeah,
the
yeah.
notion sometimes is that what serves the older population is not handsome. The
Yeah.
other thing is the handsome thing. This is where we, as designers who care about inclusive environments, have to maybe work a little bit harder and advocate that. If you remember, we talked about light and contrast and clarity of space and familiarity. We didn't talk about aesthetics.
Yeah,
Aesthetics can be composed in very different ways. Um,
totally. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's one, you can be the best designer in the whole world. And if you don't know how people are going to really use the space, to your guy's point, it doesn't matter how attractive the carpet pattern is if people aren't going to use it and if it's going to disrupt the occupancy of the space. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maggie, there's another element that we talked about is acoustics and sound.
Hmm.
You want to
One of the
go
things
ahead?
about
Yeah.
acoustics is that, unlike visual stimulation where you can close your eyes, you can't close your ears. Now, I
Yeah.
mean, I suppose if we're talking about the young generation with their permanent earbuds in their ears, they are blocking out sounds, but that's not what we typically see with most older adults. Um, and so being aware that where there are noises in the environment and that you can't not hear them, and under sort of more normal circumstances, people can sort of listen to it and say, oh, that's a background noise. I don't have to pay attention to it. Someone with
Yeah.
dementia may no longer have the ability to make that determination. And so they are actively listening to the noises all of the time. And so, again, we go back to size. Dining rooms that serve a lot of people, you tend to have more visual traffic, but you have more acoustic traffic of the plates and silverware, clinking on each other and doors opening and closing. And, in some
Mm,
restaurants, you get staff calling out to each other. And all of those are very disruptive, uh, and cause more challenges for older individuals experiencing cognitive changes. So thinking about the reverberation and what materials are you using that are going to absorb unnecessary sounds. If you've got a hard surface flooring in your hallway, you know, there are people who wear hard-soled shoes, and that clink, 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 clink as you walk down the hallway can be enough to cause fear in someone living with dementia.
yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
add, just like lighting and contrast, there is good contrast, there's bad contrast. Sound and audible elements in our environment are also proven to connect people with their past.
Yeah.
So certain sounds, again, that are familiar to this one individual could calm them down as
Hmm.
they are being agitated by other things in their environment, and should be considered. Music often, older songs are generally put in the background in memory environments because they trigger memories and they allow people to really understand themselves, remember themselves, and actually it brings down the level of anxiety.
Hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, oh, Maggie, were you going to say something
Yeah,
else?
I was going to
Yeah.
say that the one thing that we didn't mention when we talked about lighting was the importance of natural daylighting. And
Yeah.
it's both what you get through windows,
Yeah.
but it's also that ability to get outside and be in daylight. That has so many positive health benefits. And I basically say that you should never have a memory care area, particularly if you're choosing to have it be secured. And there's a that's a whole different topic that we're not going to get into today. Um, that they need to be able to have direct access to outside spaces, and from an operational perspective, it needs to be relatively free access for the residents to be able to get to on their own when they want. Because if they have to wait for staff or family to take them outside, they won't get outside. The staff are too busy. We know that there's massive staffing shortages in many care communities. And so people can spend, months basically never going outside. And the rules that we have in prisons are that prisoners have to spend at least 1 hour every 24 hours outside. Now,
Yeah.
why we mandate that for people who are criminals and convicted of crime, and don't have similar requirements for people who live in sheltered residential settings, is beyond me. We should just always have access for people to be able to get outside. It builds vitamin D. It's the best way to reset a circadian rhythm. Sleeping
Yeah.
issues are big with older adults. And if you aren't sleeping well at night, you're going to sleep more during the day. You're more at risk for falls. So there are lots and lots of benefits of really thinking about natural daylight as well.
Yeah, and I really like what you said there, Maggie, about specifically choice. Like people should have the ability to choose to go outside because, to our earlier point about designing a home, like I don't have to wait for somebody to let me out of the house when I'm in my house, you know?
Right.
You should have the freedom and the independence to choose to go outside. And yeah, I guess as a second tier, it's always great if you have, supervised access and can still get outside. But yeah, I really like the way you said that specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
The
Well,
one
oh,
last
go.
topic I think
Yeah.
we need to cover because it's so um, important for this group of individuals, it relates to orientation.
Mm,
Because they can't rely on their memory, finding their way through spaces can be like it's a new space every time. And for those of you who are listening to this, you've probably been in several different airports. Think about when you go to a new airport, how easy or difficult it is to find your way to the different gateways,
yeah.
and the orientation signs that make it good or bad when you've got identical layouts and they're A, B, C, D. And if
Yeah.
your gate information on your ticket isn't absolutely clear, I once, spent 40 minutes trying to track my father down in an airport where he'd gone to B instead of D because he had misheard what we had said where the gate was.
Yeah.
And then there are other airports where you just go through and you say, "Oh, yes, this is where I want to go," or "Clearly the bathrooms are this way," or "I can find the food court." So pay attention to those kinds of environments and think about how you feel when you're in a setting that you find difficult or frustrating. Um, Giving yourself that lived experience and stopping every once in a while and saying, "Wow, if I am frustrated by this, what must it be like for someone who's living with cognitive changes?" And that's what they feel like a lot of the time because the world just doesn't make sense to them the way it used to. And
Yeah.
so practicing those empathic moments can be really valuable.
Man. Yeah.
Uh,
Great stuff, you
Trey,
guys. Dude.
yeah, adding one thing on environment and orientation, there's many architectural and graphic solutions, signage. If
Yeah.
the environment is difficult, is not designed to be intuitively um, clear, this is when signage can come in. Signage
Yeah.
has to be contrasted, clear, and simple. Not too many words, not too many directions all at once in the same place. I tell stories about I get confused when I get to an intersection between two different highways with all the different numbers and the directions that have to happen, and I have to make a decision very instantly and very quickly.
Mhm.
Again, putting yourself in those situations to understand how we all feel and multiply it by this much for people who are experiencing cognitive decline is important. Um, Layouts want to be very simple and intuitive. I
Yeah.
think when we design buildings as ground up, it's easier to control the layouts and have layouts that are intuitive. When we inherit older buildings, then we should rely on color, contrast, lighting, signage, other tools that we have in our toolbox as architects and designers for the environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What a great sort of common thread. Because just like we were talking about with the outdoor access,
Yeah.
you don't have a restroom sign on your bathroom at home. Ideally your house is just laid out well enough that you know intuitively where the bathroom is. And if I had a home that was terribly laid out and I like to host a lot of parties, then maybe I would put a bathroom sign on my door. But as like a second tier decision, yeah, I like that.
But then let's talk about bathroom signs if you want.
Sure.
Who says that a bathroom sign has to be a man and a woman while behind the doors there's a toilet,
Yeah.
right?
Maybe the bathroom sign should be toilet.
I went to a
Yeah.
hospital recently and the sign for a toilet is a toilet. And
Yeah.
this
Right.
simplifies. This is the simple
Yep.
graphics that I want to encourage people who are listening to think about.
Yeah. I like that
Yep.
a lot. Well, yeah, this has been awesome, you guys. Do we want to wrap up maybe picking like a story to sort of like tie a lot of these ideas we're talking about together?
Uh,
Or we have some
yeah.
images that we could
Yes.
go through pretty quickly.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do
Let's
it.
let's look at those graphics.
Let's do that. So we put together some. Can we see now, Trey, on your end?
I can see loud and clear.
All right. So what we see in front of us might not mean the same thing to different people. I grew up with a telephone on the left-hand side. Right now, who of a younger generation has grown up with a telephone like this? Similar with toilets as they are changing and they're becoming more automated and electronic. What I want to highlight in the toilet in the back is that the toilet is black and the background behind the toilet is black. So it will not be apparent to people who are experiencing cognitive decline or eyesight degeneration.
I mean, frankly, if you hadn't told me that was a toilet and it didn't have that secondary lid, I would have been like, 50-50, that's a toilet or a trash can.
Yeah, yeah,
I would hate to pick wrong.
yeah. Trash can could be
At
Yeah.
least you
correct.
got trash can. I mean, the
Yeah,
concept is there.
Yeah, yeah. If
yeah.
I'm gonna go somewhere, trash can's probably the second best place. So there you go.
Yeah, that's another image that tells you a little bit about how familiar and clear environments should be and maybe less clutter or unfamiliar elements. This is a shot of the Cleveland Clinic in Center of Brain Health in Las Vegas.
Mm,
The ceiling, the forms, although might be valued by some, could be very disturbing to others. A red sofa on a red carpet does not allow people also to see the object in the environment, let alone a sofa that looks like lips. So these are again
yeah.
elements of familiarity that are important. I love this because in Singapore, which they are very dementia and designed for aging focused, their apartment blocks could be very wide and large. And there is a movement to really code these environments with familiar iconic elements, whether it comes from food or animals or others. It really allows people to recognize where they live and allowing people to continue to age in their own community.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
I'll say that when you're thinking about graphics, there's very strong research that shows that items that are simple and nameable and have very bright colors are the things that are most effective. And so the examples that Philippe just showed are good examples because you can name it and easier to remember than if it were something that were sort of more abstract but different. If you can't name it, it's harder to have it encoded in your mind.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
I think we talked a lot about toilets and signage, and I think this is an example of um, clear signage. The toilet is identified as a toilet, the shower room, and then I want us to look at the contrast of the assistive devices in the bathroom itself. Um, this is a public bathroom, it's not a residential bathroom, but again, dementia inclusive design needs to happen everywhere because you don't only have dementia if you live in dementia environment. You are experiencing public spaces and public elements are important for them to be clear and familiar for everyone.
Mhm.
Man, yeah, well said. And like, to your earlier point, your guys' earlier point about the sort of, I guess, stigma about dementia, like we're all aging and we
Yeah,
should be making these considerations everywhere, not just skilled
yeah.
nursing and memory care environments.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's going
I
to be
like
us
it.
someday.
Yeah, right.
It's going to be us.
So an example of something not to do is this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I experienced this square in Belgium personally. Not only the pattern is very disorienting. However, there are forms in the environment on the slide on the left that you see that are intended to be playful. However, they cannot be perceived by the majority of the population. So again, clear, simple, familiar elements. This can cause tripping for a lot of people. So something not to do. I walked into this intersection and I had to pause and I got my camera. I'm like, that is an example of something not to do. It's a little bit on the extreme side. Um,
But I've seen carpet that's like that.
Yeah, with a cat
This,
under it.
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, with that kind of pattern, and we expect people to be able to navigate, and it just
Yeah,
doesn't work that way.
yeah.
This next example comes from a community that had a very limited budget, and this is what their hallway and their hallway lighting was. And you can see the sort of light dark striations. And if you go to the next one, I've enhanced the image a little to show what it looks like to someone who might, be 85 or 90 because you get less light in your eyes. And so it really is very distorting. And with the next image, you can see that they found a very inexpensive solution. It's a single track fluorescent bulb going all the way down. It's unfortunate that the ceiling was so low because you get this sort of hot spot, but it's what they had. And that fixture that is holding the light, the fluorescent bulbs, is guttering material. And so it's one, single extruded piece that they just pulled down the hallway and then, got it applied. But you can see how much more even the lighting is and how someone could now navigate in this space. And I think I have one other example.
Maggie, I love this example because it shows that supportive design doesn't necessarily need to be expensive. It could be a very simple solution, but the
Yeah,
focus has to be put in the right places.
Right, right.
totally agree. Yeah, that's
Um,
awesome.
so natural daylight, I talked about this earlier and how important it is. This is a shared space in a community. I'm not sure what's happening outside, why all of the chairs are just facing that window wall, but maybe they're having, one of the World Cup games is happening out there. And this exposure to vitamin D, which strengthens your bones, is very important. You need to be very aware of how you're going to control glare. And if you look at the next image, this is another example, but they have two different levels of screening available on those windows. So depending on the time of day and how bright the day is, they can change how much light is coming in. And there's the door, and people can go right outside anytime they want, which addresses one of the other issues that we talked about. And then I think the last slide is just some resources that are freely available, and I think are some of the better resources that are available right now.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you guys so much. This has been an amazing conversation. And to our listeners, thank you all so much. And I hope you've learned a thing or two. If you've got any questions for Maggie or Philippe, feel free to email me at tking at hksinc.com, or you can email info@sagefederation.org. And I strongly recommend if you liked this and want more of the same or more information on a lot of this stuff, go to
Mhm.
the events page on sagefederation.org. That's our website. And we've got a bunch of member exclusive, educational opportunities and other stuff like that. Um, Go on, check it out, and consider becoming a member because we're a great group. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, and again, Maggie, Philippe, thanks for joining. Really enjoyed having you on.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Trey. We
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
All right, have a great
Right.
one.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.